I never thought my husband would suggest something so outrageous. After 30 years of marriage, the spark had faded, but what he proposed left me speechless. When his younger brother walked through the door that night, I had no idea my world was about to change forever. What started as an innocent dance quickly turned into a moment that blurred every boundary I thought I had. And then, he said, "I want you to spend the night with him. My name is Emily, and for the past 35 years I've been married to David, the man I thought I'd grow old with, hand in hand." When I met him, I was only 22, swept off my feet by his charm and unwavering kindness. Everyone said we were perfect for each other, and for the longest time, I believed them. David was everything I wanted in a partner, steady, dependable, and loving. Together, we built a beautiful life filled with laughter, challenges, and 3 wonderful children who've since grown up and moved out to start their own lives. But as the years went by, something shifted. The house, once filled with chaos and joy, now felt eerily quiet. It was just the two of us, comfortable, predictable, and safe. Too safe. I started to feel the distance between us, not because we didn't love each other anymore, but because the passion we once shared had dimmed. Our conversations became shorter, our touches less frequent. I told myself this was normal, that after decades together, no one kept the fire burning forever. But part of me missed it, the thrill, the excitement, the feeling of being truly seen and desired. That's when Ryan, David's younger brother, came to visit. He was always the opposite of David, spontaneous, adventurous, and magnetic. Even at 38, Ryan carried himself with a confidence that drew people in. I hadn't seen him in years, and when he showed up at our door, snowflakes on his coat, and that familiar mischievous grin, something inside me stirred. We spent the evening catching up, drinking wine, and sharing stories. For the first time in ages, I felt alive. When Ryan pulled me up to dance, his hands firm but gentle, I laughed like I hadn't in years. But when I looked back at David, I noticed something. He wasn't angry. He was watching us closely, almost as if he expected this moment. Later that night, David said something that would change everything. His words echoed in my mind, both shocking and tempting. "I want you to spend the night with Ryan." I froze, unsure if I'd heard him right. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. And that's when everything started to unravel. I couldn't sleep that night. David's words kept echoing in my head. "I want you to spend the night with Ryan." It didn't make sense. How could the man I loved, the man I built a life with, suggest something so outrageous? At first, I thought it was a joke. But the seriousness in his eyes and the calmness in his voice told me otherwise. Lying next to him in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding. Was he testing me? Did he want to see if I'd betray him? Or was this his way of pushing me away? The next morning, David acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, read the newspaper, and even kissed my forehead like he always did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. When Ryan came downstairs later that morning, his eyes lingered on me a little too long. I felt my cheeks flush, and I quickly turned away, pretending to busy myself with dishes. But I couldn't ignore the tension that crackled in the air whenever we were in the same room. Over the next few days, things only got stranger. David started encouraging me to spend time with Ryan. "Go ahead, take him into town. Show him around," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And Ryan didn't hold back. He complimented me more than I was used to, telling me how beautiful I looked, how lucky David was to have me. And every time his hand brushed against mine or his gaze lingered just a second too long, I felt a flutter in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. But guilt gnawed at me. I told myself it was innocent. Ryan was just being charming. He'd always been that way. And David? Maybe he was just trying to spice things up, make me feel desired again. Yet, late at night, when David would pull me close and whisper things like, "Do you trust me?" and "I just want you to feel alive again," I started to question everything. One evening, after a few glasses of wine, Ryan and I were sitting on the porch. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the yard. "You know," Ryan said, his voice low and steady, "David and I used to talk about you all the time when we were younger. He always said you were the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen." I laughed nervously, brushing his words aside. "That's sweet." But then Ryan leaned closer, his gaze piercing. "And he still thinks that. That's why he trusts me with you." His words sent a chill down my spine. I quickly stood up, brushing imaginary dust off my jeans. "I should go check on dinner," I said, hurrying inside. But even as I tried to put distance between us, I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted to him. The way my pulse quickened, the way his voice lingered in my mind long after he'd left the room. That night, David asked me again. Emily, he said softly, do you want this? Be honest. I wanted to say no, to tell him he was crazy, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself looking away, unable to meet his eyes. And that's when I realized the real question wasn't whether David wanted this. It was whether I did. I tried to convince myself that nothing would happen, that I could keep my emotions in check. But the more time I spent around Ryan, the more I felt the walls I'd built over the years start to crumble. It was little things at first, the way he looked at me, his lingering touches, the casual compliments that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. And then there were the moments that weren't so little. One evening, David had stepped out to pick up some groceries, leaving Ryan and me alone. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when Ryan leaned against the doorway, watching me. You're different than I remember, he said, his voice low. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. Different how? You seem restless. His words hit too close to home, and I forced a laugh. That's what happens after 35 years of marriage. Ryan didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. David told me you're not happy, he said softly. Is that true? I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. He said that. Ryan nodded. He loves you, Emily. He just wants you to feel alive again. Alive. That word. It echoed in my mind, stirring something I couldn't name. Before I could respond, Ryan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed against my skin, and a shiver ran down my spine. I shouldn't, I whispered, but I didn't pull away. Then tell me to stop, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning in, my breath catching as his lips hovered inches from mine. And then, just as quickly, I stepped back, the reality of what was happening crashing over me. I can't do this, I said, shaking my head. Ryan didn't push. He just looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes. I'll wait, he said softly. Until you're ready. His words haunted me for days. Every glance, every accidental touch, every memory of that almost kiss weighed on me. And the worst part? David noticed. One night, as we lay in bed, he reached out and traced his fingers along my arm. You've been quiet, he said. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Do you want him, Emily? The question made my breath hitch. David, don't. It's okay, he said, cutting me off. I need to know. I turned to look at him, searching his eyes for some sign of anger, jealousy, anything. But all I saw was sadness. And love. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I want. David nodded slowly, his fingers brushing against mine. Then maybe you need to find out. The next evening, it happened. I was sitting on the couch, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of the fireplace. David had gone upstairs early, leaving me and Ryan alone. You're thinking too much, Ryan said, sitting beside me. I turned to him, my pulse racing. I can't help it. Then stop. And before I could second-guess myself, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't soft or hesitant like I expected. It was firm, urgent, like he'd been holding back for too long. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped him. But instead, I melted into him, my hands tangling in his hair as months, no years, of pent-up emotion spilled out. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Are you sure about this? He asked, his forehead resting against mine. No, I whispered. But I don't want to stop. Neither did he. The rest of the night blurred into moments I'll never forget. His hands exploring every inch of me, his lips tracing a path down my neck, the way he whispered my name like it was the most precious word he'd ever spoken. For the first time in years, I felt wanted, desired, alive. But even as I gave in to the moment, one thought lingered in the back of my mind. What happens when the night ends? The morning after changed everything. I woke up tangled in Ryan's arms, the soft glow of dawn seeping through the curtains. My body still hummed with the memory of his touch, but my mind was in turmoil. I turned to look at him, peaceful, content. But as the weight of what I had done sank in, guilt began to claw at me. I slipped out of bed carefully, grabbing my robe and tiptoeing to the bathroom. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My skin was flushed, my hair disheveled, yet there was something else in my eyes. Something I hadn't seen in years. Desire. Hunger. Life. And then the door creaked open. It was David. He stood there watching me, his expression unreadable. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Emily, he said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. I know. My breath caught. What do you mean? His eyes searched mine, and suddenly I felt exposed, vulnerable, like he could see straight through me. I heard you, he said, his voice calm but heavy. Last night. I heard everything. My knees felt weak. I gripped the sink to steady myself. David, But he cut me off with a shake of his head. I told you I wanted this, he said. And I meant it. But that doesn't mean it's easy for me. His voice cracked and suddenly the dam broke. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't want to hurt you, I whispered. I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. David stepped closer, brushing the tears from my face. You're feeling alive, he said quietly. And that's all I ever wanted for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he still love me after this? How could he stand here comforting me when I had betrayed him? But before I could ask, there was a knock at the door. It was Ryan. Emily, he called out, his voice hesitant. David turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Do you want him? He asked. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. I hesitated. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure they could both hear it. I don't know, I finally admitted. But I know I don't want to lose you. David nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. Then you need to figure it out, he said. Because I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt. And just like that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my shame and Ryan. Ryan stepped inside cautiously, his eyes flickering with concern. What happened? He asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. This was a mistake, I said, my voice trembling. His face fell, but he didn't argue. Maybe, he said softly. But it didn't feel like one. I shook my head, backing away. I need time, Ryan. I need to think. Without another word, I left the room and found David sitting on the edge of our bed, his head in his hands. I sat down beside him, unsure of what to say. I never wanted to hurt you, I finally whispered. I know, he said, looking up at me. But you did. His words stung, but I couldn't deny them. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted. Maybe we can't, he said. But I'm willing to try if you are. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I reached for his hand, the sound of Ryan's footsteps echoed down the hall, reminding me that the damage was already done, and that no matter how hard we tried, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unspoken words. David tried to act like everything was normal, but the cracks in our marriage had grown too wide to ignore. I felt the weight of my guilt every time I looked at him. His kindness, his patience, it only made it worse. He deserved more than this. More than me. Ryan stayed in the guest room, avoiding me as much as possible. But even in his silence, I could feel his presence, an ache I couldn't ignore. One evening, David came home late. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of wine and trying to convince myself that everything could go back to the way it was. We need to talk, he said, breaking the silence. I looked up, my heart sinking. About what? About us, he said, sitting across from me. I swallowed hard. David, He held up his hand, stopping me. Let me go first. I nodded, bracing myself. I thought I could handle this, he began, his voice steady but strained. I thought that letting you explore this part of yourself would bring us closer, but instead... He paused, running a hand through his hair. Instead, it made me realize how far apart we already were. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, he said softly. But that doesn't change the fact that you did. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I love you, Emily. I always will. But I don't think love is enough anymore. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Are you saying you want to leave me? He shook his head. No. But I think we need time apart. No. I cried, panic rising in my chest. We can fix this. We need honesty, he interrupted. And you need to figure out what you really want. I sat there, stunned, as he stood up and walked away. Ryan found me later that night, sitting on the back porch with tears streaming down my face. I heard what happened, he said quietly. I looked up at him, my heart aching. I ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything, he said, sitting beside me. You're just finally admitting what you need. His words stirred something inside me, something I wasn't ready to face. I don't know what I need, I whispered. He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. Yes, you do. For a moment, I let myself lean into him, craving the comfort he offered. But then I pulled away. This can't happen again, I said firmly. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I understand. But did he? Did I? David packed a bag the next morning. He said he needed space, time to think. Watching him walk out that door felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. For days, I wandered around the house, haunted by memories of what had happened. The passion, the betrayal, the guilt, it all swirled inside me, leaving me hollow and confused. Ryan stayed for another week, but we barely spoke. When he finally left, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'll be here if you need me." And then he was gone too. Now I sit alone in this house, surrounded by echoes of a life I no longer recognize. David calls sometimes, but the conversations are short and awkward. I can hear the hurt in his voice, and it kills me. I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if I want to. Because the truth is, a part of me doesn't regret what happened with Ryan. A part of me feels alive for the first time in years. But another part of me misses the safety and comfort of what David and I had. And now I'm left with a question I can't answer. Can love survive betrayal? Or is this the end of everything we built? The house felt emptier than ever. The echoes of laughter and warmth that once filled these walls were now replaced by silence and shadows. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where David's coat used to hang. It was strange how something so small could feel like such a massive void. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of everything that happened began to settle. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, questioning every decision, every touch, every word. Was it passion or weakness? Discovery or destruction? I thought back to the moment David told me he wanted me to feel alive again. He wasn't wrong. I had felt alive, but at what cost? I hadn't just crossed a boundary. I had shattered it. And yet, as much as I tried to drown in guilt, I couldn't ignore the truth. Something inside me had awakened that night, a hunger for connection, desire, and freedom that I didn't even realize I'd been suppressing. But freedom came with consequences. I reached out to David one night, desperate to hear his voice. "Hi," I said, my voice shaky. "Hi," he replied. I could hear the hesitation, the pain he was trying to hide. "I miss you," I said. There was silence on the other end. "I miss you too," he finally said. "But I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were." His words hit hard, but I knew he was right. "I don't want to go back," I admitted. "I want to move forward, whatever that looks like." We talked for hours that night. For the first time, we were completely honest, not just about what happened, but about the years leading up to it. The slow drift apart, the loss of passion, the fear of admitting we were both unhappy. David wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But we loved each other. And maybe that was enough to try again. The next week he came home, not with promises to forget, but with a willingness to rebuild. It wasn't easy. Some nights we argued. Other nights we cried. But slowly we started finding each other again, not as the couple we used to be, but as the people we were now. As for Ryan, he stayed away. I thought about him often, but I knew that chapter had to close for me to move forward. He had been a spark that reignited something inside me, but he wasn't the future I wanted. David and I went to counseling. We rebuilt trust, not by erasing the past, but by facing it head-on. And through it all, I learned one of the hardest lessons of my life. Desire is powerful, but love is stronger. Love doesn't always mean perfection. Sometimes it means surviving the ugliest parts of ourselves and still choosing each other in the end. And maybe that's what makes it real. What would you have done in Emily's place? Could you forgive the betrayal? Or would you walk away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more shocking tales of love, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned. Our next story dives even deeper into secrets that could destroy a family. You won't want to miss it.